Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hey, and welcome back to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for coming along on this journey of this show that is designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. Hey, the Digital Enterprise Society, it is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to be the co-host of this show along with Craig Brown. Craig is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, how are you today?
I'm great, Tom. I'm looking forward to this discussion. This is a bit different. We're talking about one of the subgroups of the Digital Enterprise Society, one of the working groups, and we'll talk more as we go through the interview.
Awesome, and those working groups are really important, so I think it's good that we're talking about the working groups. Hey, each week, this is what we try to do. We try to bring to this podcast interesting interviews and other ideas that are going to help all the listeners enhance and grow their career. And today is going to be awesome because today we have Altair Kaminski, and she is with Northrop Grumman. She's in the space sector, and her title is she's the PLM administrator, but she does a lot of stuff. So Altair, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Thank you for having me on. I'm very excited.
So can you tell us a little bit about your career background and sort of what led you to where you are today and the work you're doing now?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I started out at the University of Utah, going into a computer engineering major. And while I was going to school, I needed to pay for my schooling. So I ended up with a job at a kind of a small research and development composites company called Radius Engineering. And I worked there for 5 years as a technician and learned an enormous amount about composites and how they're put together. From there, I went to what it was formerly just ATK, and I worked as a process engineer doing composites layup. And from there, I went to Altair Communications, and I started there as a process engineer as well, and worked in that for about 5 years. And then halfway through that, I was asked to join a team of people who were going to do what is known in the industry as Big Bang. We were going to take a lot of our legacy systems and tools and move them into the big three, a PLM system, an ERP system, and an MES system. And I did that project for 3 years. And when it was over, I ended up being the manager of the PLM team that resulted from that implementation. And I did that for about 2.5 years. And then what was then Orbital ATK asked me if I was going to be a glutton for punishment and come help them move out of their legacy Team Center enterprise system into Team Center unified system. And I've been working on that project for the last 4 years. We're not quite done, but we're actually getting very well on our way.
That's interesting, Altair. You're bringing back memories. I deal with a fair number of your comrades there at ATK, now Northrop Grumman. And I used to always give one of them in particular a fair amount of grief about if General Motors can go to unified, why can't they? But never mind.
Yep.
In any case, and that wasn't my job. I got it. It was there when I arrived in that assignment. So your journey about moving to the big three, I found that kind of interesting. A lot of companies talk about it. Solution providers talk about it. Sometimes the solution providers step on each other and they want to do each other's job. It's interesting to me, you had the three, PLM, ERP, and MES. Can you elaborate a little bit on, will those three silos or those three columns always exist, or do you see any kind of synergies coming?
I am of the opinion that I think all three will still exist. There is a very, not a clean line. There's a lot of integration that you want to have happen so that you can reuse data and have everybody looking at the same piece of information. but they do different things. And I think it's hard for one tool and one software provider to be able to tackle all three of those inside of a single tool set.
Well, I agree with you. I think you said they were different usages. They're quite different in what their goals are. And I think some of the software vendors, I think they just overstate their case looking for revenue and in fact don't have solutions either. They might be better off staying where they're really good. And then, the one that's interesting to me is Siemens, only because it's the big Siemens wants all three, right? So, seeing Teamcenter, SAP, and whatever system is going to be manufacturing operations, seeing those get combined will be interesting. If it happens, it'll be a big industrial giant like a Northrop Grumman or a Siemens that does it. So it'd be interesting.
Yeah, and I just, there is a lot of overlap, and that's where it's easy to get lost in, or that's where some of the tough decisions I think have to get made, is where that that Venn diagram overlap between the two systems in that integration aspect.
One of the things that I think is related to that is the Venn diagrams tend to always be data, which is fine because that's important. However, the people that resist the most, you got to think more about the user experience, and the user experience in those different domains is really different. Whether they're deciding a logistics issue in ERP, or they're deciding an operational issue in manufacturing, or even what we're doing up in design, which eventually produces a bomb, right? There's still
Absolutely.
different user experiences, and it's the user experience Venn diagram that doesn't overlap. And I actually think if they would draw that one more often, they might realize what you pointed out at the beginning, that they're really probably going to be three separate columns, if you will.
Yeah, we had a lot of conversations about how we could arrange the data essentially so that users didn't have to jump between a bunch of different tool sets to do their job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, make that user experience simpler, if you will. Interesting. Well, one of the things that you and I share a past in, a little bit different generation, is this thing called originally it was called the Aerospace Special Interest Group. It's now called the Aerospace Working Group, I think. Working Group. Oh, sorry, I got the acronym wrong. And describe for our audience, the people that listen in are folks, a lot of them are Teamcenter based because we came from PLM world, but a lot of them also wonder what the working groups are. And I thought it would be good to talk a little bit about the one you and I know best, and maybe bring them up to speed. So can you describe the Aerospace Working Group for us?
Yeah, so it was founded, I should know dates, but I don't, sorry.
A long time ago, before Craig.
A long time ago. And it was, kind of three fairly big aerospace and defense companies that came together and said, there are spots where we have overlapping needs from our software tool suppliers, and we feel like we could get a better response from them if we came together as an industry to tell them what we need their tools to do, rather than as a bunch of individuals. And that's how it essentially got started. I know it focused pretty heavily on the CAD tool sets in the beginning, but it sort of grew into that to Teamcenter and PLM, along with some of the NX. But we're even seeing, because PLM is so encompassing, discussions around simulation tool sets. The acquisition of the Mentor products is causing a lot of conversation inside of the group. And we've even found that it's too hard to cover everything inside of our group. And so we've actually started creating subgroups to help with still trying to accomplish the same task of, can we as an industry feed the software suppliers what our needs are? So we've created these subgroups that allow us to have more of the individuals who know and work in those areas, give the feedback rather than try and expand the working group itself into this big behemoth that can't get anything done.
Yeah, and that's good insight. For the listening audience, the car companies got involved probably 15 years ago, and in fact, we at General Motors, one or two of us or three of us, we were always at each of the meetings. In fact, one of our guys at one point was the chair that you are now. But yeah, the same argument. We thought, well, wait a minute, if we could combine our interest, our awareness, maybe we don't agree on the focuses, the relative priority, but just being aware of what each other is trying to do gives us opportunities. We even learned from each other. We did what I thought was some excellent cross benchmarking. I remember one in specifically around bomb management, which now this other organization has kind of taken on the different Aerospace Working Group that SimData manages that talks about multi-bombs, right? And the different views of a bomb and why you need multi-bombs and so on. So the people that were behind that were in fact out of this group. And it's interesting for that. So what are the current challenges that you guys are talking about? And what are the top three?
So honestly, there's a huge push right now for a better, I'm going to say, understanding, I guess, of how model-based systems engineering it should be implemented.
Well, first you got to agree on, is it just engineering or is it the whole life cycle? This is part of the debate, right?
That is very much part of the debate, and part of the conversation that we're trying to have amongst the team is, should we take a step back even and help define it for ourselves as a team so that we can all be on the same page when we say MBSE and which portions of it we want to be talking about. And just again, a better industry definition essentially for all of us. So that is a top. Integrations with other tool sets. So I mentioned Mentor. There's a lot of conversation around the reuse of the data and that desire for this digital thread, and even down to the digital twin, and understanding what it takes to get there, which does lend itself, again, very much with the idea of MBSE, but it's now getting down to, we understand we have some different tool sets that are going to help us get there, and how do we bring all that information together? How do we have the suppliers help us reuse data as much as possible? And then I guess right now it feels like one of the third things that we're wrestling with as kind of an overall group are, most aerospace and defense companies have a lot of legacy data that's coming along with them, or just like happened with Orbital ATK, we were acquired by Northrop Grumman. How do we migrate data, consolidate data, move from Team Center Enterprise to Team Center Unified? So just the data migration type conversations is another topic that's kind of high on the list. And then I think the third or the fourth thing I was...
Altair, is that just CAD data, or is it also metadata like characteristics of parts or suppliers or locations, things like that? Is it all that kind, or is it just geometry data?
It's both. Some are just CAD migrations, and some are, again, entire site consolidations of some sort.
Yeah, and it, especially a successful long-term company, they probably have legacy systems they rely on that they view as their central nervous system or as their circulatory system. And they get really nervous when you walk in and you say, hey, I'm going to change it. I'm going to make it better with this commercial offering. They're like, well, okay, but not here first, right? Try it out somewhere else first, right? So it's interesting. You were about ready to mention a fourth point?
Yeah, and the fourth thing is having the software vendors see if they can help us with upgrades. Siemens in particular, but I think it's just a growing trend, is this concept of sort of continuous release. And for those of us that are trying to do the implementation end of it, trying to keep up with that on testing, not only the software, but all the configuration and customization changes that we may have made to the software is just heady work for us. And it means that we usually can't take advantage of the latest and greatest that they put out there.
So that's a difference between the car companies and the aerospace companies. Let's explore it a little bit. You guys talk about, well, when you establish the tool BOM, if you will, the list of tool versions and so on at the beginning of a program, then you want to stick with it through the program, even if it goes on for many years. Most of the car companies now go through the pain of an annual or a biannual, every 2-year kind of upgrade, and they go through the pain you just stated on a very regular basis. And people sometimes look at us car companies and say, what are you guys thinking? Well, what we were thinking is not having the legacy data problem, not having the worry about, is the data from 10 years ago in a particular car able to work in the current tool set? We're sort of guaranteed that because we go through this upgrade. And then to your point, competitive pressures more than anything are causing Siemens and their competitors to do continuous release. And that just has huge ripple effects if you're not ready for it, right? So is there some change occurring in the aerospace industry to embrace continuous thing? That would mean embrace continuous release. That would mean that the chief engineer of a 10-year program would have to say, oh yeah, I'm going to go through 3 or 4 tool upgrades throughout my program. A lot of times those folks in the past, it seemed to me, weren't willing to say that. Are they changing their mind?
I mean, the overall conversation is around, yes, there is a desire to make sure that, again, not only are we just using the latest and greatest, but part of the reason for the Aerospace Working Group is so that we can have the conversations with the software suppliers, Siemens mostly, for that group, to say, here's what we need the tool to do. And they say, great, it's in the release that's coming out 6 months from now. And we're going to say, that's awesome. I don't actually know if that meets my needs because I'm not ready to upgrade to that release you're going to put out in 6 months. So there's an understanding that we need to be able to be a little lighter on our feet and go through some of that pain. But there's also a kind of a push to Siemens to say, please make those upgrades easier. Right now, most of us feel like as soon as we do an upgrade, we spend at least 6 months telling Siemens where they broke all of our stuff. And it shouldn't be that hard to do upgrades if you're going to try and do them every 6 months.
Yeah, I think you're right. I gave it my shot when I had your job at General Motors, and the rest is history. So we won't dwell on it. What accomplishments has the Aerospace Working Group achieved in the past 2 years? What would you like to highlight?
So I will admit we've spent the last 2 years sort of, again, coming to that realization that PLM is getting a little too big for us to manage as a single quote group. So we are kind of proud of the fact that we've been able to set up some of these subgroups to get really specific feedback to very specific pieces of the tool set. But if we want to take something that we've been trying to drive for, there was a weight management project that was done, and we are now starting to see Siemens come back and say, here's what we actually put into the tool as a result of the requirements that you gave us from that project, and we'd like you guys to take a look at it and see if it meets what you were hoping we'd give what you need from the tool set. So I'd say that's a really big win for us, was that we actually had a requirement set, they implemented it, and they're giving it back to us now to say, does this meet the need?
And is this Team Center based or NX based or a bit of both?
It's a little bit of both. Definitely a little more NX based from what I've seen, but there is a big drive as well in that Aerospace Working Group to make sure that there's an understanding that some of us are going to have to deal with multi-CAD, and so making all of the updates in NX doesn't always benefit us as much as we'd like it to.
Well, and even in NX, how you represent fluids, which, we all have material of some sort that's the propulsive liquid, right?
Yeah.
And how you represent that in the CAD system for mechanical parts at times can get complicated. Again, you got to make some choices, right? And so I think that would be interesting. I have not paid attention the last 18 months or so since I got out of the business there, but it is an interesting problem. Another example we had a little further back that maybe didn't result the same way, but it did get a consistent set of requirements to Siemens and the simulation team was managing simulation data. That was, I can remember folks from ATK and JPL and General Motors helping write that standard that eventually became what is now SimCenter today. And of course, other people contributed along the journey. But I think it's just a great example of how groups of us, some of us competitors, can get together where we agree it's not competitive and say, here's common requirements for the task of engineering. In your case, the weight management of your vehicle, or in the case I brought up, in managing simulation data, which of course is tied to geometry, right? As you're trying to prove things virtually before you ever do a physical build.
Right.
So the Digital Enterprise Society is going to be a year old here in another couple of months, and the Aerospace Working Group is a part of it. In the charter of the Digital Enterprise Society, we want to help medium and small size manufacturers. Maybe some of the problems they were having in getting into the industry was the cost of ownership, whether it's machines or skilled people like yourself or licenses. What do you see the DES evolving? How should we help these medium and small manufacturers? Is it just requirements for tools, or there's other things we can do?
It's interesting that you bring that up, because one of our newest, and they're not officially members yet, but the newest companies to join the Aerospace Working Group is, and granted, they're dealing with a lot of legacy data, but one of their biggest asks of the group is, we're brand new here. Is there a mentoring or a lessons learned that maybe the group could share? And I think that's kind of all over the place. If DES wanted to evolve, the amount of lessons learned, right? I mean, you asked about doing the Big Bang and what did that look like? So much of the communication that that was PLM world and is now Realize Live is people networking on, hey, have you done this? And what should I avoid? What should I make sure I do?
That's really good insight. I think it was one of our concerns as Siemens wanted to have direct responsibility for the event. We folks left behind in PLM world wanted to also make sure the networking continued. And that's what this first year has been about, is making the networking, making people aware we still exist. That's part of it.
We're here.
But it's interesting. You're right. There's a lot of younger, newer companies out there that well, first they might be cloud savvy as well. And given that they're cloud savvy, they actually they want solutions that are cloud savvy, right? Now there's a bunch of other issues with cloud that would take another interview, but I think it's a great idea. We should mentor people who ask for our help. We should go within our group of members of the DES and see who can help them, right? Whether it's a member one-on-one or whether it's even a company. I mean, it's interesting. Your journey, right? Recruited a couple of times, the last one into what is now Northrop Grumman, to help them get us to unified. Kind of an interesting observation, right? If you don't provide good mentors, then you end up going and what's the fair word? I was going to say steal people like you. Well, I guess there's a market then, right? But in any case, I think that's really good insight. It's been a joy chatting with you. I kind of miss the steering groups and working groups. But you choose to go into retirement. You stay involved maybe at an arm's length, but you don't have heavy lifting responsibilities, so you kind of lose touch. And it's good to get an update from you. I think with that, I'll hand it back to Thom.
Thank you, Craig. Hey, Altair, you said a couple things that sort of sparked in the back of my head, because one of the goals of this podcast is really to help sort of those people who are still trying to grow their careers. Maybe they're newer, maybe they belong to one of those younger, newer, smaller companies that Craig was referring to. And we covered the idea of sort of being able to network with people, to be able to find answers. Craig brought up, and you brought up also being able to mentor people. And those people who listen to this podcast regularly, we recently had an entire episode dedicated to networking and the importance of networking and how you can go about do that to grow your career. We also had an episode on mentorship about, 3 months ago that I think is a really good episode people could go back and listen to. But while we have you here, I would like to know a couple of things. Why, for someone, you're in a career, it's busy. You have a lot of responsibilities as you've gone from place to place. Your responsibilities have grown. Why would someone like you, or someone maybe younger growing up in the business, why would somebody even get involved with something like PLM World, or now the Digital Enterprise Society? And then why spend the time to get involved and participate in the working group? And then you're the chair of it. Why all of that? Why? We're busy. Why should they do it?
Don't let anybody freak out when I say this, but I ask myself the same question occasionally.
Why did I do this?
Yes. Honestly, I do feel so. When I was in L3 is when I very first joined. Again, what back then was the ASIG, and there's a lot of just conversation that you can glean from the banter that goes back and forth in between these companies and people who are comfortable talking about what they're very passionate about. And I am passionate as well about, as a process engineer, I really want to impart upon everybody that the reason that you're creating that drawing is not just to check a box. It is because you're actually trying to communicate information downstream. And PLM means that to me. It means the ability to help with communication and to enable processes, not to necessarily dictate them. And so anything that I can do that helps with that, I feel is worth my time and my energy, even though sometimes it feels like maybe it's not, that it is a lot of extra work. But in the end, I know we'll get a better product if we can come together and help Siemens understand how we use their tools and why they're so beneficial for us, why we rely on them so much for being able to communicate amongst ourselves, communicate with our customers, communicate with our suppliers.
Well, I
don't know if that's what you were looking for. But.
No, in fact, I was
excellent.
It's excellent. I was just going to say to the people who are listening, rewind about 2 minutes and listen to the passion in Altair's voice as she answers this question. It like I sat up in my chair as you started talking, because you lit up like a light bulb. And it really does come down, if you want to succeed in your own career and if you want your company to succeed, passion's one of those things that you have to have, and you clearly have it for what you do. And that actually explains why do you get involved. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here on the show. We appreciate you sharing with everybody. Any last words?
Nope. I will just say that if you talk to that technician who was working at Radius Engineering, she had no idea that PLM was a thing at all. And I was willing to take that leap when I went from being a process engineer to joining that team that did the PLM implementation. And so don't be afraid to make some of those changes that lead you to your passions.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being on the show. And thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened. We're going to be back next week with more thoughts, ideas, and information in and around product lifecycle management. Remember, the Digital Enterprise Society, it is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.